Support for American Black Journal is made possible in part by Chase Bank, a proud investor in programs that enrich our community.
Support for American Black Journal is made possible in part by the Michigan Chronicle newspaper, the voice of the community since 1936. The term diversity is tossed around loosely. Sometimes it's a code word for black. Other times it means inclusion. No matter what you think, our world has become increasingly diverse. So where do black folks fit in this new world of diversity? We'll talk about it next with the race doctor, David Campt. That's next on American Black Journal.
This is American Black Journal, commentary and news on the black experience for more than 35 years.
Welcome to the Journal. I'm Cliff Russell. Issues of race dominate the news. Michael Vick, O.J., Gina Six, the list goes on and on. In a world that claims to embrace diversity, race continues to be a wedge issue. Well, my guest, Dr. David Campt, calls himself the race doctor. He's an expert on issues of race and diversity. Dr. David Campt, welcome to American Black Journal.
It is great to be back home in Detroit, back in my hometown.
You were out in California. You came back. Good to have you back.
It's great to be here.
I believe it was W.E.B. Du Bois who said that in the 20th century, and certainly the 21st century too, the issue is race. Do you concur, and do you think that is still true?
Of course it's still true. If you look at how our society is structured, the level of division, the level of inequity, if you look at wealth rates, I think that black folk have 1/8 the wealth on average of white folk. If we look at lifespan, if we look at incarceration rates, if we look at poverty rates, clearly we have a racial problem. But it goes beyond that. If you also look at the ways in which people's friendship structures are separate, people's social networks are separate, we clearly still have a divided society. It's a lot better than it used to be, but we still have a long way to go for our goal of creating an inclusive democracy that works for everybody. So, yeah, he was prescient then, and it's still right now.
Now, this is a debate I have with some friends of mine, Doctor. We all agree, it's irrefutable, that we have a history of chattel slavery, of separate and unequal for years and years, Jim Crow, voting rights disparities, so on and so forth.
The list goes on and on.
But
right.
you get to the 60s, and there was this thing called the Civil Rights Movement, although James Baldwin said the Civil Rights Movement began when the first slaves stepped off the ship. However, Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, there is this consciousness, the media come, all of a sudden you have television, and we have hopefully evolved to a point now where we say, you know, that stuff is bad. It is wrong. I have friends, though, who say when you look at the economic structure of our country and the underpinnings of our country, it is absolutely essential that racial disparity be maintained in order to maintain the economic and social order, and that diversity is just a ruse. It's a conversation that they have to make people feel good. So I've said a lot. Please share your thoughts.
I think that speaks of a frustration that people have, that after all these years, we still haven't solved that problem. But I think if we look at countries in Europe that are not ethnically diverse, we can see that there isn't the level of even class division that we have here. So I disagree with that. Maybe I'm just hopeful. Maybe I actually believe in what the Founding Fathers, as hypocritical as some of their statements were, I still believe that we'd be better off as a society if we in fact included everybody. I don't think that those divisions are an inherent and necessary part of our future. I think that ultimately, if we're going to be as competitive globally as we need to be, we need to find a way to make sure that everybody is included, that everybody is contributing. I don't think it helps American society to have huge portions of the public who are not contributing, who don't have opportunity, who are in jail, who are incarcerated at incredibly high rates of both rates of expenditure and portion of the population. I don't think that helps our society. Not when we're going to be competing with other societies which don't have those people who are in caste who cannot contribute.
But let me be devil's advocate here. A lot of my friends who are the critics say you talk about helping society and making society better, but the folks who run society couldn't care less about that. What they want to do is maintain their power, maintain their status. They've been able to acquire that power and maintain it by causing division, by causing racial inequity, by having white folks think that their problems are because of these Mexican folks or these black folks, and black folks thinking their problems because of poor whites who are in the Ku Klux Klan or whatever, and that's something that is very intentional in order to keep the old money still in the hands of the old money.
Well, I just choose to believe otherwise. I think that any economist would tell you that if you have a society where you have more people contributing, you will create more wealth. So I just disagree with that. I think that what you're hearing is, again, a function of frustration. People feel that this must be intentional. It must be on purpose. And certainly there were times in which those things happened on purpose. But I think now if these folks in power could snap their fingers and increase the participation of people who are disenfranchised in the economy and turn them into contributing workers, that they do it. Now, this isn't to say that their hearts are aligned with folk. Selfishness is a part of the human condition, and I think that certainly as you go up the material ladder, that selfishness can increase. I'm not Pollyannish about that. I'm just saying that our collective struggle we need to engage in is how to knock those doors down to help them see it is in their interest that people be included and that there's things that they can do about it. At the same time, while we're working on ourselves to take responsibility for our own ways in which we disenfranchise ourselves. Part of what I believe is there's things that the other folks are doing that keep us down and things that we are doing that keep us down. And if we're really going to solve this problem, we have to work on both of those.
Now, interesting. I'm glad you jumped into that because I talk to a lot of folks, too, who say it makes no difference if there are conspiracies against black folks in this country or if there's institutionalized racism that is, constantly being strengthened, that we are so entrenched and have such a deep history in this country as black folks that if we ever had any sense of singleness of purpose and cohesion, we'd be fine. We could take care of our problems. Do you agree with that? And what do you think, as African Americans, we need to do to help ourselves?
Well, I go down to the on splitting the difference on the kind of W.E.B. Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington thing.
Yes.
I think we need to work on the man and work on the brother man at the same time. Both have to happen. I certainly agree with the kind of new analysis, the structural racism thesis, that if you stopped all racism today, the nature of how our economy works is that you replicate these cycles of disparity. I think that's true. And that's why we need everybody on board pulling together. And pulling together means we got to spend a fair amount of energy working on people in power and white folks in power in particular to combat the racism and the divisions that they foster from a position of power. And at the same time, we have to work on ourselves and the pathologies in our community, the dysfunctions in our community. We have to do both. Now, it's a big task,
yes,
and we need everybody involved, and people have to focus their effort. But I guess it always disturbs me when I hear people thinking we need to all get on the same page, or we need to all spend our energy on the man. There's more work to be done than can be done in anybody's lifetime. We just all need to get busy trying to do some piece of that. Whatever piece of that encourages us and keeps us going is what we need.
How do we get that ball rolling, Dr. Campt? Do we need a charismatic leader who can kind of pull people together and get them moving in the same direction? Do we need our churches or our schools or other institutions to develop some type of initiative? Or do we all just need to find God, find religion, and deal with it ourselves?
Pray to Jesus.
Yes.
Well, certainly prayer to our gods is important. But I think that all of that is necessary. I think that the question that individuals have to ask themselves is, am I doing enough on the problem of inclusion? And that applies even to middle-class black folk. I mean, let's face it, things have opened up enough that people have certain opportunities now. I mean, you got a few black people who are the heads of major Fortune 500 companies, and all through, not as high as they should be, disproportionately lower down. Things always get maler and paler as you go to the top. That's true. But there's opportunities out there now. We have to ask ourselves as middle-class people even, what am I doing for my cousin Tukey? What am I doing? To what extent am I expending enough energy to lift him or her up. So I'm not letting anybody off the hook. We all have to take on a piece of that. So yeah, we need more prayer, but we need more people getting busy and expanding the scope of their concern to beyond themselves. And that might mean you work on uplift strategies. That might mean you work on your white friends. That might mean you work on building institutions, building businesses that have some sort of awareness of the need.
The important thing is that you work.
Exactly.
That you do something.
And don't just retreat to your own selfish destiny, your selfish outcomes, which you're incentivized to do by the American materialist society. Just worry about yourself, right? Well, we need to get past that if we're really going to create the kind of society we can.
Now, what about those folks who believe that our biggest problem as African Americans is other African Americans? You talked about a black middle class. A lot of folks say black middle class people treat the rest of black folks with more contempt than white middle class. Is that division within the race a problem?
Have to look at that too. I mean, I guess as a person who tries to foster dialogue, I try to invite people to a conversation where we see how everybody has something to offer and everybody has some level of dysfunction. And part of what I try to do is to create a situation where we can all look at all of that. So, sure, 400 years of oppression have affected us, and then we all know the sayings, the white man's ice is colder and all of that. So we have to look at our own role in our own condition, including the ways in which we disdain each other, people who look like us or don't take us seriously or think we need to get away from those folk, just like everybody else get away from those folk. We need to examine that question and do that internal work. So I guess I just don't believe in singular solutions. Yes, how we relate to each other as people is the issue we need to be talking about, like everything else we need to be talking about.
We hear a lot about how black folks, Hispanic folks, people of color, frankly, suffer because of racism and lacks of diversity and lacks of opportunity. But how do we all suffer, Doctor? I'm of the opinion that as a single entity, our nation, including white folks, suffer because of racism. Do you agree?
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, if you look how much money we're spending on the prison system, if you look how much money we're spending on welfare, if you look at how much money we spend because we have our cities so racially divided that people have to transport themselves across huge boundaries generated by white flight / middle class flight from the current and the past. If we look at what that does to our energy consumption, I'm just saying we all are paying a cost for the lack of a coherent sense that we're all our brothers and sisters as Americans.
And so a case certainly can be made. Dr. Campt, we're going to take a break right now. Hold that thought. Mailer and paler. I think I'm going to use that later sometime.
You can use that.
All right. I'll give you credit, though. We'll have more of this conversation with the Journal as we continue. This is America's longest-running public affairs show, American Black Journal. Welcome back. My guest is the race doctor, Dr. David Campt. Before the break, we were talking about how, as an entire nation, we suffer from racism, although when you look at economic and health and educational issues, many of the things that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, black folks suffer disproportionately. How do we get folks to buy into this notion of equal access, equal opportunity, when so many folks are doing so well under the current system of inequity?
Well, part of what we have to do is become more articulate, as much as I sometimes get irritated when people say, oh, you're so articulate. We have to become more articulate about what we see and what the problems are, and the problems are to others. So, for example, the way our school systems, our public school systems have eroded, which have both caused by and produced white flight. And of course, we see that in Detroit, one of the most segregated metropolitan areas in the entire nation. What is the cost of that? What is the cost to white America, for that matter, in abandoning public school districts, so they have to move way far out and then and establish their own school districts or send people to private schools, and they're still commuting to downtown areas all around this country. What is the cost to them? What is the cost to them of feeling like I can't go to certain parts of the metro area, my downtown, after a certain time? Is what they call in England no-go areas. What is the psychic cost? What is the social cost to that? Part of what we have to become better articulating is helping people see that the current situation doesn't work. I've done work in various cities where we try to help people see that. Often that happens in seminars of 20 or 30 people, where you have people look at, okay, here's our condition. Here's our level of separation and division. Okay, what are our values for our region? People are always very proud of their region. We're open, we're tolerant, we're inclusive. And you say, well, how does your actual experience compare to your values? It isn't hard to get people to see the disjunction between that. And so you take them through a process where you're engaging with people who look different than them, of examining, well, how did it come to be that we got like this? And then what might we do? And what role does trust in each other play in that? That's a lot of the work I do, to try to create those settings of exchange that move people forward and deepen their own commitment. Sometimes it's just making them aware. Sometimes it's they were somewhat aware but didn't know what to do. It's all about being a facilitator and creating a sense, creating a space in which they can, with other people who look different than them, say, we have a collective problem, and I have a piece of that problem that I'm contributing to, as well as I'm suffering from that problem. Okay, what might we do together to solve that problem? I think that's the task of a facilitator.
So many of the perceptions that we have of other people, so much of the racism and the stereotyping and prejudice that people have has been fashioned by what they've seen on television or what they've digested through mass media. What role should media play to kind of address these problems?
Oh, the media plays a central role in the ways you said, and in some other ways that I think are important to highlight. Certainly, we need to spend energy on having people in the media look at what's the imagery that they're communicating. And this is music, this is that whole rap music, hip hop thing, this is television, this is radio, it's all of that. We have to do that. I think one really undermining role that the media is playing now is how issues around race are cast. Part of what we need to do media education about is to help the media better define the problem. So, for example, you get situations like down in Louisiana, in Gina, where the media goes down there and they'll ask a question, is Gina racist? And so you get the black people saying
right.
no, yes, and the white people saying no. Or you can name any situation like that. And I said we need to ask better questions. If you ask a question of how do racial tensions or divisions play, what role do they play in the situation, that's a much better question, because then you create a platform where maybe white people and black people might have different amounts of that, but it's a better question than a yes, no. It's more like we need to get away from a kind of a courtroom sense. It's either this or that, and be more like insurance adjusters, where they say percentage of the problem. That's the kind of analysis we need. But if the media asks better questions, we can move toward that. When they're kind of stuck in an old notion of what racism is, where it's either yes or no, it's racist or not, that's not helping us. That actually undermines our capacity to create collective solutions.
We understand that the Republican Party has been engaged in Southern strategies and elections, at least since Nixon, where they play upon the prejudices and the fears of whites and blacks, and they cast blacks in negative lights, and they scare white people, and they get enough votes to win, which could lead to a whole nother line of questioning in terms of intent. However, do you think that we need to, I don't want to use the word too strong, but certainly reject and even rebel against our current leadership and our current political party system?
Well, if you're asking me subtly, how do I feel about a third party or a third black party, I think that democracy is invigorated by more democracy and more inclusion. So as a general matter, I feel that. I do think that there's a particular problem with the current Republican Party and its willingness to ignore black and Latino voters. We've seen that the Republican candidates somehow were too busy to come to the Latino Univision debate, and they were also too busy to come to the black debate hosted by Tavis. And so what we need to do is actually engage them. I think it was great that Newt Gingrich and Jack Kemp called them out on that and said that we cannot be the country club party. But part of what we have to do is to figure out through some amount of shaming and some amount of invitation to how do we get these people engaged? Like I tend to be liberal, but I think that we need to figure out how do we create an anti-racist conservatism? Because part of what goes on is that Republicans can't figure out a way to be conservative and still be anti-racist. They haven't done that work. We haven't engaged in that question.
Is it that hard to figure out, though, Dr. Campt?
I don't think it's hard. Here's the truth. I think that there's enough conservatism within black people that it's possible to do that. Black people are more conservative than white people on abortion. They're more conservative than white people on homosexual marriage. They're more conservative than white people on the issue of the relationship between God and morality.
Yes.
So what we need to do is to figure out a way to have Republicans leverage what they have, leverage those kind of points to get them a little bit better on racism. Like if they could just acknowledge that racism has existed, it really affects people, and they have some connection to it historically, that would go so far in just reaching us. So I actually have proposed a project on that, and I'm still trying to figure out a way to land it. But I'm just saying we all need to be concerned when 90% of black voters vote for the Democratic Party,
right,
even if we like the Democratic Party. That's just not good for democracy.
And I want to make sure that people understand, too, that I'm not letting the Democratic Party off the hook by my questions. Just the Republicans have been so out front in their kind of rejection of black voters.
Until the very end. Just to remind,
exactly.
in the last election, what happens at the last minute, Karl Rove sends people to Ohio and it raises the issue of homosexuality up, and then increases the black vote to George Bush, but I think to 16%, and of course he carries Ohio, and it's over. Now, I think we need to worry about homophobia in the black community. I think we need to deal with that.
Right.
But I'm just saying there's ways of trying to shake the tree which are not ultimately productive, and it doesn't make us feel really included. I think that we need to work the problem to invigorate our democracy.
The NAACP, I'm shifting gears here, recently buried the N-word. I would have said the real word, but my producer says, no, don't do that. We buried the N-word, a useless gesture or an important signal?
Well, I think that it shows black folks' creativity, and I think it's cool in a certain way.
Right. Now, you're a diplomat, right? Is that
no, but wait a minute.
That's a diplomatic answer.
I'm gonna be clear now. First of all, I think that there's a value of symbolic ritual, and I think we needed more of that in Gina. We can come back to that if you want to. About the N-word specifically, I think that that word has a value in 3 different ways. I think that word has a value between black people as an on-ramp to conversations about things in our community that are a problem. That's what Chris Rock said. I like black people, I don't like N.
Yes.
And that's my grandmama used to use the word like that. So it's an on-ramp to that conversation about our own pathologies. I think that between and among white people, that word has a value as a kind of a somewhat taboo, it should be somewhat taboo, release valve for their frustrations, for the internal work. I think that ultimately by burying that word and make it so taboo and make it so that white people are shunned if they say it, it focuses on their editor but not their thoughts.
Yes.
And I think that we are so far from being really free of racism that having that word as an outlet is valuable. And lastly, I think that as a double standard, that word has a value. If we agree that black people can say that word and white people can't, and that's a double standard that's frustrating, well, there are other frustrating double standards in the world, too. That becomes an on-ramp to that conversation. So I disagree respectfully with the NAACP and burying the word. I think that is not only unproductive, it's counterproductive.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think it alienates folks who might be willing to join the process, join the campaign to rid us of this racism problem, but feel that it's such a polarizing word and such a polarizing issue that they can't get their arms around it?
Well, I do think that there's a certain value in raising this question. Like, I think the NAACP would have been better off had it issued its position and invited people to a conversation about it. My problem is that it came as a decree. I mean, it's just like, you remember when we became African Americans? Like, I don't mind being African American, but I remember in New York Times, sometime in 1991, well, Jesse Jackson declared we're African Americans now. Now, you know, that's fine. I'm just saying, when did the NAACP decide that the word is buried? Why not decide it and say, we want to engage you in conversation about that? As opposed to just telling you what the truth is. The word alienate, I don't know. I guess what I also worry about is among black people, we're so much wanting to be on the same page that sometimes we diminish our own diversity. And we need to really make sure that we approach conversation with each other with a reality that we don't all see things the same way. And we need to improve our skills in conversation. That's why I wrote a book about dialogue, because I think it's so important for us to do that.
Which brings us full circle, harnessing the power of dialogue. It has been absolutely fascinating, Dr. Campt, and we'll have to have this discussion again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you for being here. Well, that's all for this time. Thank you for tuning in. This is American Black Journal.
Support for American Black Journal is made possible in part by Chase Bank, a proud investor in programs that enrich our community. An encore presentation of American Black Journal is available on demand for viewing at DetroitPublicTV.org.